Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Linda, for the introduction. Although it's the second day of the CEE Sustainable Finance Summit, I certainly hope it won't be second best. So I'll put this challenge out also to my panelists, that they take a very active role in this debate, but especially also I'd like to invite the audience to join us. Those watching online as well, don't feel shy, please ask questions. I will have an iPad and I'm seeing all the questions asked. Now, the topic of our debate, financing the energy transition in Central Eastern Europe, actually is a debate that has been ongoing for many, many years. And the question we're trying to answer today is actually not a new question. What is missing to actually have a successful and speedier transition in the region? But what I would add from my side, I would add the word still. What is still missing to have this transition unfolding? Because for the past 5 years, we've actually seen an incredibly dynamic debate between the member states in the region and the European institutions. We have seen that the messages, the research, the analysis produced in the member states and that in the Commission have actually led to concrete results. We've seen dedicated mechanisms for the region made available. We've seen special funds being created. We've actually seen the debate land at the core of the negotiations on the new EU budget for the current multi-annual financial exercise. So in that sense, there has actually been a response, a back and forth, a real conversation. And so that's why I do want to ask that my panelists, whom I will introduce shortly, seek to also answer the questions from the perspective of what is still missing. Now, of course, unfortunately, this year we're in a very difficult context in Europe. We do have a war in Ukraine that is changing everything. But at the same time, I do want to maybe try to tease out a little bit the elements of the debate that actually stay the same. So I would like us to try to identify what has changed as a result of the war in Ukraine, but what has stayed the same in the conversation regarding the energy transition in the region. I would now like to actually move on to introducing my panelists. Next to me is Mr. Balázs Felsmann, who's a senior research associate at the Regional Center for Energy Policy Research. He's also a former Secretary of State from Hungary, and he has played a very active role in several policy documents in Hungary, including the new energy strategy of the country. Next to him is Julian Popov, who is a fellow at the European Climate Foundation. He's also the chairman of the Buildings Performance Institute in Europe. Julian is a former Minister of Environment in Bulgaria, and currently also sits on the advisory board of Climate Kick, as well as of the European Council of Foreign Relations. Next to him is Mr. Fadi Al-Khair, who is the group CEO for the Energon Holding, and he has extensive business experience, including in the field of financing innovation and focusing on new technologies. And now we have a surprise panelist, who is Mr. Martin Dratva. He is actually a partner of the summit. He is from the Red Side Fund Management. You can see the logo on the summit poster. And he will have to tell us a bit about his work in this field. I have actually been introduced to the concept of the Nova Green Management Fund just recently, so I'd be curious to hear more about that. And the way we will structure the panel is that I will first ask a question to all the panelists, after which I will have targeted questions. And of course, every time I'll see that there's an interest from the audience to participate, I will make sure to give the space to that. So with that having been said, we can just jump straight into the first question, which is I'd like to ask you to share with us what you think have been the greatest 2 to 3 obstacles preventing greater energy independence and a speedier transition across Central and Eastern Europe.
Well, I think that it's a very interesting question because you ask about the independence. So when I hear these words, independence, I'd like to ask first that, okay, independence, but from whom? From what purpose to be independent? I think as a first we need to answer this question. Because of course, as you mentioned, nowadays this is a abnormal situation. And I think that, of course, this situation, we need to analyze what we can do against of similar cases what happen now because of the Russian-Ukrainian war. And definitely, from this perspective, it's clear our answer, let's be independent from the Russian gas. It's a very simple answer. But our panel is mainly about the green transition. And if we like to concentrate on the independence issue from the green transition perspective, I am not sure that the independence is a good word. Because if all of our small countries try to build up its own energy system independently from each other, I think the result will be really terrible. Because we will invest into the same type of technologies. In each periods, we have the favorite technologies. A decade ago, it was the wind. Now everybody'd like to invest into the solar. But let's imagine what will happen if all of our countries will invest only into solar. We will have lots of surpluses in the middle of the day, and we will lots of missing electricity in the night. So that's why I think that the most important obstacle now, I think, is that the regional countries' energy strategies are still isolated from each other. There is relatively small conversation between the countries, and there is no real cooperation to develop different technologies with achieving a better system when we have a connected type of energy production facilities. Let's tell you only one example from my country, Hungary, that in Hungary there was a real huge boom of solars in the last 2-3 years. So now we are over 3 gigawatt of capacity of solars, and there are additional 5 gigawatt permission licenses. Let's imagine a country with 6 gigawatt maximum peak consumption with 8 gigawatt solars installed at noon. What will happen? Of course, definitely, we will export. It practically happened in this April now. Hungary is typically an importer country, but now we begin to export. It's now okay, because fortunately, our neighbors did not invest so much in the last 3-4 years into the solar technology. Therefore, now we can manage it. But what will happen after 5-6 years if everybody do the same? Unfortunately, it will practically a significant impact on the value of produced electricity from solar. And if we, because this is a financial summit, if we think about the financial consequences of it, it will practically devalue the solar investments on the market. So therefore, I think that the most crucial and most important obstacle what we need to solve somehow is the regional cooperation. And you asked about the independence, and I really think that this is a problem now that unfortunately in a normal situation, countries think that, okay, cooperation is fine. But in the age of abnormality, unfortunately, I see that politicians will look so-called local solutions. So I don't want to tell too much examples on that, but I think it was a very, very good example when Bulgaria declared after Russia thought that we will not export gas to Bulgaria, that they will consider to stop the transit throughout Bulgaria, for example, to Serbia and to Hungary. They did not do it, but you know that the thinking, I think, is a problem. So from one side, I think the answer is clear. We need to invest lots of money into the regional cooperation to develop our systems, but in parallel, we need to increase the trust to each others in our allies. So I think this is now, from me, the most important and most crucial obstacle. And let me tell you one additional obstacle, I think this is the so-called social factor. So the energy price in our region is still more important than environmental factors. And politicians know it, and politicians use it. So this is, I think, another obstacle. What in the current situation, I think it's very problematic to solve because of the extreme prices. But in general, I think it's still a problem in our region.
Thank you very much for that first response. I found it very interesting because you actually referred to the meaning of energy independence, and this notion has actually been at the root of the Energy Union when it was first introduced as a project actually starting from this region that we're discussing today. However, the meaning of this term has changed over time, and I would say that with the sort of the mid phase, which was the Energy Union with a forward-looking climate policy, the step was actually made to redefine this term also to talk about a transition to a net zero energy system. So it was interesting that in your answer I picked up a lot of the things that sort of stay the same, but meanings might have changed, and also where we find ourselves today against these notions. So with that, I think actually your presentation leads very nicely to Julian's answer, because I know Julian has been working on regional cooperation for many, many years, and I followed his work very closely, and actually he's got several visions that he's outlined for how this could work in practice. So I'd be very curious to hear, obviously there's the answer to the question of what have been the main obstacles, but then if you wouldn't mind also responding on the notion of regional cooperation.
I mean, I agree very much with is that we have to be very cautious with the idea of independence, because when we talk about energy independence, we usually talk about energy nationalism and energy populism, and because we have plenty of populist and nationalist politicians and lots of companies that are trying to use that, we're getting usually in a very serious mess, which is also strategic mess. And that strategic mess is blocking our development. And when we talk about Eastern Europe or Central and Eastern Europe, this block is quite visible, and I think it's quite visible that we are lagging behind in many respects, and this is because of lack of trust, because of lack of proper cooperation, because cooperation is not about signing memorandums of understanding. It's about infrastructure, it's about integration of markets, it's about joint projects, and it's about also cooperation in research and development and innovation. And this is an area where I think Central and Eastern Europe is lying very seriously. It's the field of innovation, and not academic research. I mean, this is also a problem, but sort of being ambitious to push forward the new technologies. We have this thing in our mind that because we are poorer, so let's see the richer countries, what they will do, and then we will pick and choose various things that suit us. And it doesn't work like that, because we keep lagging behind and behind and behind. And especially when we have a very dynamic energy transition, if you don't get into the pace of development, there is a very serious risk that Central and Eastern Europe, or East and West, will widen their gap, because there is a gap, there is a former Iron Curtain, and it will become thicker and stronger, exactly as a result of the Green Deal. I mean, the Green Deal brings a very, very serious and everything around the Green Deal, of course, very serious risk of widening the gap between the East and West, exactly because the East, I mean, apologies for the generalization, because there are many different countries in the eastern part. But in general, the East is waiting. It's trying to see what will happen, while the West is moving very fast forward. And in 5 years, we will see how, I don't know, in Eastern Europe, there are lots of cars that are 5 years old rather than 20 years old. And we'll be very happy with that, because we'll have 5 years old Volkswagen rather than 20 years old Volkswagen. But at the same time, in Germany, all the cars will be electric. So the difference will be fundamental. And then, of course, that will fuel deep resentment, and we will start behaving like some kind of benign Putins and saying, well, the West is against us. It's not the West that's against us. We lack this ambition, and I think that's a very serious issue. In terms of what's missing, I can say what is not missing. One thing that's not missing is money. I mean, there is a lot of money, and on top of the lot of money, there are more money. And the recovery funds that are about to come in the whole of Europe, but proportionately more in our region. I mean, these recovery funds come after the recovery is fact. So I don't know what they are for, because and these recovery funds will create additional disruption and fuel laziness in the system. I mean, this is a major thing that we, instead of using the public funds to develop more agile financial system and transition, we become more lazy and more moaning that we don't have enough money and we want even more money. And this, in my view, is a major fundamental problem in the system.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you so much for sharing such a wide range of examples as well to really illustrate the conversation as it's shifted with time, but that unfortunately the mentality hasn't actually shifted so much around the question of the energy transition in the region, despite the funds that have been made available, despite the sort of forward thinking of some of the more innovation-focused countries on, let's say, on the Atlantic shore in Western Europe. I do find it interesting, since I sort of challenged you to talk a bit about what is changing, what isn't changing. As a professional working in climate change, I would be tempted to say that because everything is at risk of changing, the idea is to actually indeed pursue an innovation policy that would, in a way, allow you to maintain things to some extent as they are, or else you will have these sort of disruptions that you referred to and other disruptions that could come about. But it's true that in the very cautious approach in Central Eastern Europe, we see this realization missing. It's only sort of the perhaps countries that have an older culture of economic innovation or investment in innovation that understood that now is the moment, the window in time to actually fast forward the innovation with a view to making sure in the medium and long term we can actually keep things as they are. But having said that, I very much like the way the panel is sort of carrying a very nice flow, because you mentioned the need to invest in innovation, and here we have Fadi Al-Khair, who is actually exactly working in mapping out new technologies, investing in new technologies with his group. So maybe you could tell us, I suppose we're now moving a bit from the policy analysis to the financial actors and the innovation entrepreneurs in the region, but perhaps you could respond to what was said just now.
You disagree with me.
Actually, it's not, thank you, Suzanne, thanks for having me. It's not about disagreeing, it's just about different perspective. I'm more simple guy, more straightforward looking and going. So I will share a story that I lived here in Czech Republic, and I think it summarizes quite a lot of what we are facing here and what are the challenges, I would not say obstacles, challenges that we need to tackle and face. in 2016, I persuaded my partners that we need to go and aggressively invest here in Czech Republic in photovoltaic and heat pumps and battery systems installation company, which was a very, very crazy idea. They thought I'm a nuts, but because they liked me, they said, okay, go and play. And I did some calculation expectations, and I did a lot of analysis of the structural trends that are behind it. And I knew that I was right, that what I was doing the right thing, because if you look on the declining price of the solar, increasing price of the electricity, what is as a structural trends behind that, I know it's like, you know, the probability that it will work is very, very high. And they did this leap of faith, and because I didn't want to let them down, so I was really on this project. And I tried to go and meet every important stakeholder in the country, from bankers to big utility players to the government figures and so on. And I was like trying to explain to them, look, there is tons of money lying here on the ground, just, you know, let's go and grab it together. It will be more fun than if we grab it all by ourselves. We will not be able to grab it all. So come and grab it with us, you know. And it was really interesting to see that people here in Czech Republic, simply, they don't understand what is exponential growth. It's really, I think it's one of the things that is really a big problem that I don't know, maybe it's the way we teach mathematics in the school, but we understand linear. But if I ask anyone how high column we will have if we fold a paper, simple paper, 42 times, people say 1 meter, 2 meters. Actually, it's from here to moon, because it's 42 folds. It's 100% each fold. This is exponential growth. And when I was speaking with high-profile board members of big banks and telling them, look, it's really a huge trend, it's a mega trend, and here is why. And I was citing like CSIS and Bloomberg New Energy Finance, AI, and all the outlooks of big companies, BP, Shell, and say, look, everybody is saying that, and this is the structural reasons. And they asked me, how many installations you had this year? That was 2016, 17. And I said, 600. And they said, oh, it's too little. But I said, but last year it was 60, and next year it will be 2,000, and the next one it will be 4,000. And this is the exponential growth, so it's a really huge market. But they seem that they didn't understand that. The second thing I noticed, the second challenge or obstacle in the way of thinking that I was able to observe is that it's a funny situation, but we are speaking in a country where two recent presidents were climate change denials. One of them made a career on that. President Klaus wrote a book that we are not living on a green but blue planet, trying to explain that global warming is not happening. President Zeman is saying, yeah, it's happening because we can see it now, but it's not because of human activity. The classical arguments of climate change deniers, and they were prime ministers before they were presidents. So we are 16 years under, 20 plus years under leaders who have a very, very loving relationship with the fossil fuel movement, industry, civilization, and very, very anti-new, progressive, climate change-based sustainability activities. So this plays a role. If you are a big bank in this country or state-owned utility energy, you don't want to like go against the will of these powerful people because they have their influences and so on. And it's very, very present here in Czech Republic. In a degree that I was surprised how much it's present. The good thing is that the structural trends are behind me. That's why I can speak honestly, because the transition is happening anyway. Even if everybody is trying to stop it, it's happening. The only question is who will benefit from it and who will make money from it. And if we will be reactive, we will not understand what's going on, it will not be us who will make the money. I mean, us as our company, yes, we will, but not the country, not the banks, not the government, not anyone else. So this is the simple question. And one last point. I think it's very, very also naive from policymakers, and sorry if I think I already made a lot of enemies, but I hope I will not make some more. But I think it's naive from European Union and from European Commission, policymakers and bankers, an assumption that it's enough to just throw some money and to throw some policy, and then miraculously we will have energy transition. It's about capacity buildings, it's about consistency, it's about culture, it's about education, it's about strategy, and we really need in this region to be shown how we can make money on this. If you show the government, the banks, exactly how they can make money on this transition for themselves, then you will see it will pop up. It will pop up anyway, but it will be a huge catalyst if you explain how they can actually make money, not only put the policies and some like norms and stuff like this. It's not working.
Very interesting responses. I particularly enjoyed the tracing of the problem back to education. I was actually lucky enough to study climate change in high school, and I recall distinctively looking at the way that actually the problem is advancing exponentially and thinking, unless we find a solution to, or a series of solutions that actually allows us to deal with it, also with the potential of growing exponentially, we're just not going to be able to make it. And I wonder if there isn't something about that in fact we would actually need to maybe start teaching climate change with a view to understanding exponential growth and then looking to apply it to climate solutions in business, finance, innovation, and so on. So it's just an idea I'll throw out there. But then I'll move on to Martin and ask for his views. What have been the main obstacles in achieving a speedier transition in Central Eastern Europe?
Thank you. I think I will pick up mostly on the second part because I think the independence has been covered quite well by the other panelists, and I think I will focus more on the energy transition and how it is. I mean, where it comes from. I mean, generally, if there is a change, I mean, any change, then there might be two ways how to make it happen. So you either push it from the top, and I think in this way I consider as the government and, for example, the banking sector. Why the government? Of course, because it can provide you or create you the right framework on to create the possibilities to invest. And as Balázs mentioned, Hungary has made a great deal in opening or inspiring the investors of creating, you mentioned 3 gigawatts of solar energy. We have seen in other country, which is Poland, in the past 3-4 years, it has been continuously developing both, I mean, not only solar, but wind energy. And I think this is something which enables the transition. And I picked these 2 countries because they have been most markant and most active. And exactly as Balázs said, it has been decided a couple of years ago, and it is not connected with the Ukrainian war, but the results are being visible just now, with all the gigawatts of renewable energy sources being opened currently in Poland and in Hungary. So I think this is one of the most important topics, to create the right framework. I'm not now commenting, as Julian said, the incentives, because it might deform the market. I tend to agree with that, but some sort of framework. So I think that's the one way. Then another way from the, let's say, supply or the push side is the banks. Okay, so how will the bank treat you or treat the transition? We have seen the demand on the renewable energy sources, which are usually subsidized. I mean, here, for example, Czech Republic, Slovakia, we have seen 10 years ago the off-take regimes, 200, 300, 500 euros per megawatt. Is that right or not? I mean, we can argue about that, but still banks, I think now, I mean, till now, they were resilient to finance any other projects than the ones which is a cash flow based on subsidies, right? So, and I think this is one important fact that the banks need to understand the changing nature of this business, that it will be based on the market regimes. PPAs, are the banks already willing to finance that? Well, let's see. And the second half, how to motivate or make this transition happen, in my view, is the demand side. And I think Balázs mentioned that. I need to only support that. That is the society. I mean, prior this crisis, was there enough of demand on the electricity or the gas? Did anybody, I mean, generally the society, did anybody care where the electricity come from? Or if you turn the hot water, what was the source of heating the water? I don't think there was enough demand or enough care about where it comes from, I mean, the energy. So that's one thing. And the other part of this subgroup, I think, is the investors. The investors need to be convinced that we need to focus on some area, for example, not coal, but in the renewable energy sources. And I think combination of all those four factors will make this transition happen, in my view.
Thank you. Very good to hear a little bit about different perceptions and different economic cultures that I pick up, and the way we think about sort of, you know, kind of where our, we take them as maybe even public goods, let's say, so we don't really think where does the heating come from at this stage. And so I think all those are important questions, and I think maybe that's also a reason why you see a difference between Central Eastern Europe and Western Europe, because the economic culture in Western Europe is of the sort where actually I feel that the population have asked these questions before, and they're very interested in, and they have, for example, in Germany, applied energy efficiency in house heating measures, and so then there was a big renewables acceleration at some point, and there were many interested consumers. But I think in the Central East European region, we are in a way still stepping into our full rights of being informed consumers and taking an active role in shaping our future through that positioning vis-a-vis the services that we get. So maybe that's something we can all push for in the future. Since you mentioned Julian directly in your intervention, I feel like it's my obligation now to actually move on to Julian and to actually ask you, after you've heard from Fadi and from Martin, what do you think would enable more energy project financing in the region?
I can stay silent for a very long time. I don't know. I mean, there is this push and pull concept that Martin was presenting is quite good to apply here, because we have to look at the push and pull sides. But one thing that will help probably is to change the attitude of governments about what governments are about. I mean, our governments tend to have a very transactional mind. Okay, I'm now in government, I'll make this deal. It's not your business to make deals. I mean, your business is to create the environment that will bring the deals in. This is very typical when we can see it now with the Ukrainian case because of the gas crisis. Governments jump in and start going and negotiating with other governments to bring gas from here and there. Governments decide that they want to build LNG terminals, and it's all government driven, and this is creating quite a serious problem, because governments don't follow usually commercial logic. They follow something else. They follow elections, they follow some kind of friends, and so on. So if we reformat the government work and make the government work more on legislation, on protecting the market, but also if we have much better and competent regulators to create the environment that will bring this energy projects. When I talk about energy projects and governments, I mean, I can't skip the whole LNG excitement. I mean, now all the governments want to build LNG terminals. And when I say all the governments, not just East European governments, I mean, the German government is a special case in principle, but the American government, the European Commission, everybody wants to build LNG terminals. And this is quite wrong, basically. And it's wrong not simply because of climate, I mean, that's one issue, but economically and from security point of view is wrong. And this is a very good example how governments do wrong things. And if you see the agreement between the EU and US about the task force that they decided how to develop to save Europe from Russian gas dependency, it's basically a response to US LNG salesman pitch. We'll send you lots of freedom gas. Wow, okay, let's build lots of LNG terminals. And we will get lots of LNG terminals. We'll get them in 10 years. We won't get them by this winter. And we will not need them. And that's one problem. The other problem is we are building these LNG terminals in order to get off Russian gas. Well, guess what? Russia is very, very ambitious in increasing its LNG export terminals. So basically, what the American government is pushing and what the Commission is pushing to build LNG terminals for Russian gas. And thinking that they're doing that against Russian gas. So we have to look at these mega projects that are so attractive for governments, because it's much more attractive for a government to build Nord Stream or to stop Nord Stream instead of changing windows. And changing windows and fixing walls is much, much more effective in terms of energy policy, but it's boring. It's boring. It's much more kind of heroic to fight pipelines.
Well, and with the whole LNG focus, the immediate response, I mean, is quite clear that for a problem as complex as our reliance on fossil fuels, which structurally, because of the way the supply is just actually working around the world, that we're constantly going to have issues. I think a simple solution cannot ever answer a complex problem such as the one that we're looking at. So exactly. The idea of even proposing such a solution is, of course, to explain that a fix has been found. But I do worry equally to you, Julian, that actually this problem is actually only exacerbating what Balázs referred to earlier, which is the very high energy prices we've been seeing. They're not very likely to go away anytime soon, certainly not if we don't address the structural issues that make us so vulnerable to that. So in a way, yes, it is interesting to look of, do we need boring responses when it comes to climate to the, let's say, fiery geopolitics of our times? Is this in the end about just sort of owning the transition in our communities, in our homes, and then finding partnerships with the financial institutions or the enablers to actually make this happen? It's a big question, and we'll have to see. I will ask Balázs actually to react to what has been said, and also with regards to your first intervention, I was very interested in hearing about sort of the differentiated role of Hungary with regards to deploying solar in the past year. So I actually wanted to ask, what do you see as being the current obstacles to funding more renewable energy sources? And do we need a more nuanced and contextualized approach? And if so, could you outline one?
So I think that we have heard lots of very important thoughts. Julian mentioned that for now, money is not a real obstacle. I think it's very important to understand that this is not from financial perspective. I think that practically, I like this approach that governments like the big stories and these are not market-driven stories, but frankly saying, investors and banks like the boring environment. So they like the stability. They like when there is so-called a normal life and they can calculate everything. So I think that in this turbulent period, the real issue is that it's really abnormality. Age of abnormality. Therefore, I think in each part of the investments, it's very, very challenging to think on what to do and to what type of project to invest in. And I think if we see the current obstacles, we need to see clearly that when we work on the energy transition, I think we have three challenges, and only one of them is solved for now. The first is that decarbonization of the electricity production. This is what I think is more or less solved. We know the technologies, we have available technologies. Well, I think that as Europe will achieve 70–80% of the production on renewable based, the remaining 20% will be really challenging, but the majority, I think it's easy to solve. However, we also have questions here, and as you see now, the new communication, it's more and more communication about low carbon technologies rather than green technologies. I think it's another interesting question. Will the changing thinking on gas create a situation when nuclear can come back to the European market? I think now it's a real question mark. Let's see now, Czech Republic also declared that they will organize a tender in Dukovany. In Hungary, Paks 2 is also on the table. So I think that in Poland didn't have nuclears, but now they are considered to build some. So I think that why it's important, because we see that on longer term, the living together of the baseload producing nuclears and the volatile renewables, it can be a challenging one. And if we are sitting on a financial conference, I think it's important to understand what is the future of the baseload producers. I think this is not a good answer when we think that, well, let's build electrolyzers and let's use them to convert the surplus of these nuclears to hydrogen, because from energy perspective, this is not really a proper solution, very costly and not really effective. But let's see that this is a challenge. But I think this is the smallest challenge. So the other two is much bigger. The other is the decarbonization of the transportation, and the third is the decarbonization of the industry. Martin, I think you mentioned the PPAs, the industry PPAs. I think it's a very important part of the whole story, because if we concentrate only on the energy system, we will not understand that the biggest challenges are in transport sector and in industry. And frankly saying, we don't have now easy answer how to decarbonize the industry. If you follow the debate in the EU now on the ideas on the industry decarbonization, I know that this conference also will dedicate panel discussion on the industry decarbonization opportunities, but let me tell you some thoughts on this, that practically there is a very, very slow movement on it. There are ideas. This is the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which can subsidize the European production against of the third countries' production. The other idea is the contract for carbon contract for difference, but really very, very slow movement. Why? because it's costly and we don't have easy solutions for it. And on the other side, the same issue with the transportation. Julia, you mentioned that. I think I agree with you that there is really, for now, a West-East problem. Practically, there is a re-export of older cars from West to East, which can cause significant differences in the demand for the transportation fuel in the two parts of Europe. It also need to solve. And I thought, and I began this, that I think banks and investors like the boring environment, and I think that I see some progress in case of the, for example, in case of the energy efficiency. More and more countries introduced energy efficiency obligation scheme, which I think is a much better solution than to allocate funds to a centralized way and the government will decide to which building to renovate. This is a market-driven approach, and I hope that this can help to make the changing the windows and investing in energy efficiency of households. And last but not least, I think that the real challenge that I mentioned in my first round is the social factor and the price sensitivity of the households. So when we see that, for example, like in my country, when 75% of the households use natural gas for heating, it's an extremely big challenge to make the shift to other way of heating solutions. Practically, it requires a lot of new investment and a total renewal of the heating system of lots of houses. And I think this is which, for me, in my view, is one of the biggest challenges. And I am a bit disappointed that there is only a very few discussion about how to decarbonize or how to decrease the gas consumption of my country, but I am afraid that the same situation in other countries. And at the end, I mentioned that this is a positive change, is the energy efficiency obligation scheme in some countries, like Hungary introduced it last year. I think it's an opportunity, and I believe that however, these renewable subsidy schemes will be more and more market-driven, and will reduce the subsidy component, but I think it still will remain interesting also from bank side and from investor side.
Thank you so much. I will actually refer to Martin and Fadi with two more questions before I start taking the questions from the audience, because we are having an audience that's sending us questions. But you actually directly referred to Martin in your intervention, and following good parliamentary practices, I would actually then invite Martin to comment how can we finance projects such as the deep infrastructural projects that Balázs was referring to, for example, grid expansion and additional sort of core infrastructure that's needed for the energy transition?
I think I had a great pass from Balázs at the very beginning that we should not focus only on our market, and I think this question is great in the sense that we need to focus on the infrastructure and the grid themselves. We can then speak about the electrical cars and how weak the distribution network is. I mean, almost everywhere here in Europe, we all know that if the percentage of the electrical cars will rise to, I don't know, 10-20%, the distribution network almost in every country will collapse. And I think that's the very, very right question. I will make an example that we pay 100% for 1 megawatt hour, and depends on the actual market price, 1/3 or 1/2 of that price, which we pay as the customer, goes to either the distribution or grid operators, meaning they need to build the grid or maintain the grid. And there is also one important part, and I will, for example, illustrate it on Slovakia, but the same applies in almost every country here in this region, that there is one part of this 100%, it might be 20%, depends on the country, goes for the renewable energy support. So we are paying everybody now for these energy producers who have the offtake price, 500 euros, 200 euros. And I will use an example from, as Balázs is doing, I will use it example from my country, which is Slovakia, and how they did it there. So they took some portion of the support, which goes directly to the producers. I call it as an operational subsidy. They prolonged the subsidy regime in 5 years. So they decreased the feed-in tariff by roughly 50%, and they could use this price, which they are not paying as the direct operational subsidy, for the distribution and grid operators. Meaning, I think that could be one way how to finance this grid and infrastructure. I like the idea. And another would be, and I think I touch on this a bit, is or I think, again, I will thank Balázs for that. I mean, we as investors, he call it the boring status. I would rather prefer use stable, because we need to have the title is the framework. We do not ask for any, let's say, direct or indirect subsidies. We would be happy to come to, for example, Balázs' country and to hear that, okay, we are opening the market. For example, there has been a large tender for renewable energy sources opened on the 2nd of May, and we offer you this tender. There is no subsidy given, but we sort of promise you that there will be no major changes to operate or to the operation after you have invested here a couple of hundreds euros million. Is that sufficient for investors? I would tend to agree. And if supporting by the banks, which again there are some incentives by the government, and if they say that, okay, guys, you are sort of allowed to finance not only the directly subsidized energy projects, and which are based on the PPA, then I think combination of those three could do the work, in my view.
Great, thank you. Good ideas. You mentioned the banks, so I will actually turn to Fadi. And to frame the question a little bit, we know that countries in Central Eastern Europe rely quite heavily on their banking systems for investment, lending loans as well as investment. So why has there not been a shift from the side of the banks towards more renewable energy projects and more energy transition financing?
Mm-hmm. Thank you for the question, and thanks for the ideas that my colleagues share. It's difficult to react directly on your question because there were so many interesting things that been said. And I will first react a little bit on Julian because I disagree. He wanted me to disagree. I disagree that the money problem is solved. There is a lot of money that is allocated into the sector, but the way they are administered, they are distributed, the way they are used, I think that there is the problem. And so the allocation is huge, it's much bigger than we are able to absorb, but the way it's done, it's only increased bureaucracy, and it creates funny and different, like not constructive things on the market. The simpler, the better. Like, if you set up a simple rule for next 2-3 years, we will subsidize 1 megawatt peak X%, then you don't need to organize public tenders and so on. It's a very simple way. You will have less administration. It's fair for everybody. So the less complicated administration of the subsidies and of the incentives is better. I think from my point of view, the best way how to start financing of these big infrastructural projects is to promote some tax incentives for local investors, because then you are tackling two flies in one hit. Because if you make the Czech economic elite invest in renewable components production here in Czech Republic, then we will be schooling Germans. They are not transiting fast enough very soon. if Mr. Křetinsky and Mr. Tikac invest in battery manufacturing or solar panels manufacturing here in Czech Republic, we will have a fastest energy transition ever. You will be surprised how fast we will be able to move. And it just give this part of the budget into the tax incentives, and I think this is the fastest, easiest way how to deal with that. When it comes to the banks, these banks in Czech Republic, we almost have no independent banks here in Czech Republic. We privatize everything to the large banking groups. Not all, there is few small examples, but the majority of the market is in the hand big banking groups. And the problem is that they were, the Czech branches of these group banks were so much adored of their stability during the 2008 financial crisis that they they said, oh, great, we were doing great, not innovating, just, trying to keep everything like very, very conservative. The majority of their incomes and their stability was from mortgages, very conservative approach to mortgages and banking fees. And they tried to maintain this structure and strategy because they were like everybody was clapping, like saying, yeah, great job, guys. The society, the politicians, their mother companies. And I think this is the heritage that is going contrary to what is needed now. I love sailing, and when you are sailing in a steady wind, then you can read the manual, and stick to the protocol. But when it gets stormy, then you need to improvise, and then you need to get creative. And this is something that is completely different than what was incentivized and appreciated from the banks here in the region. So I believe that there is a solution if a bold CEO of a group or of a local branch will create a small team and give them autonomy, give them the resources, and also give them some books about basic design principles, approach. I think they can come with very, very interesting ideas and concepts which they can test and then scale up. And I think this kind of like out-of-the-box thinking is really needed, because what I'm meeting day to day is, we would like to be green, so we print like we are green bank, yeah, and then when it comes to the end, it's the old same scheme of risk analysis, and there is no innovation almost at all. And I don't blame them. It's just how the culture of the banks develop. So if they create a smaller teams with autonomy, I also would like to say one example that, from my point of view, is a success story and can be inspirational. Chess, which is mainly state-owned, I think they did a great job. Being state-owned and being so progressive here in Czech Republic, it's really a brave move, what the leadership of Chess did. And what they did is they created their own corporate VC fund called InVent, and they put it completely separated. There was a huge discussion that the CEO of the fund put his legs on a table and take a picture, and it was a disaster in their corporate identity department, a big discussion in Chess. But this is the level of autonomy that you need to provide, and they've been doing great. So I think this is the most important thing.
Good to hear, and I personally really appreciate the power of examples, so thank you for really referring to a wide range of examples and giving us loads of food for thought. I will turn to the questions from the audience, and we have actually received quite a few, so what I've tried to do was to actually group them by category. I see the main, the category that's dominating the questions is the category relating to profits. So we're getting many questions about profits, and I will actually pick the one that I think is really quite open to be answered by all the panelists. So when should one expect to see the profit from the energy transition, and in which form? Who should and who could be profiting from the energy transition? And so maybe to invert the order of the first panel, I will actually invite Martin to respond first.
I think that's a good question, and the very simple answer is that the end customer or the society as itself should benefit from that, meaning having cleaner air, yeah, I think that's basically it. And why I think so? Because the demand in this renewable project has increasing, especially after the Ukrainian crisis. And as we are on the CEE Summit, speaking of this couple of countries, I think we will, speaking of the profits of the projects, I think we will, the profitability of the project will decrease similarly as it is in Germany. We might be reaching yields around 3-4%. So the investors, there will be a strong push on the profitability on the project for the investors. So I think at the end of the day, we'll need to agree that, okay, everybody will decrease their profits, but at the end of the day, we as the society will be, or shall be satisfied with the outcome.
Brilliant, thank you. Paddy.
I would say there was a great cost-benefit analysis done by Deloitte for Union of Modern Energy Sector, which we are part of, and I really suggest if you can go through it. It's very interesting. But of course, our customers, retail people who install photovoltaic, they are benefiting right now quite a lot, because with this hugely increasing price, they are kind of hedged against them, not 100%, but quite a lot. The attractiveness of the real estate is growing, the price of the real estate is growing, so it's hugely beneficial if you install such installation. The same comes to the industry. If you are able to hedge against the market pressures, it gives you many also technological benefits, because if you install battery system with photovoltaics, it not only gives you hedging from the market pressures, but also gives you better quality of electricity and also gives you a backup capability. And this is another synergies that are there. So also, of course, we are paying for our employees quite a lot of much higher salaries than is average for their qualification. So our employees are benefiting as well, and of course capital is benefiting at the end. The government can be benefiting in providing better, highly paid jobs if they like incentivize innovation and energy transition. So I believe that everybody could benefit. Everyone who will participate. If someone will lock himself against that and try to hide, he will not benefit yet.
Thank you. Julian?
Same for me. I mean, in general terms, the society benefits. And in more specific terms, the profits, they're already coming, but they're coming for the companies that run their business properly. And to have profits, you need to take risks. So there is no this kind of notion of communist benefit that everybody will get equally successful or unsuccessful, as is the case in communism. But there is a competition field. And there are companies that are doing very well. And these are the companies that have their kind of good vision and are fast enough to get into that. I think also that there is a very good space for profit of companies that are more imaginative in aggregating small projects. Mm-hmm. So this is one of the barriers that we see, especially in energy efficiency. Companies would say, well, I mean, it doesn't make sense to go into a project for renovating one building, and then another building and another building and another building. But the companies that manage to aggregate, let's say, 500 buildings and do that as a whole thing, and present that project as a bankable project. These are the type of companies that will work well. Then we're seeing now this massive surge of renewable energy. I mean, companies, there are some very interesting Bulgarian companies that are doing fantastic work all over the world in solar engineering. And they have installed about 10, 15 times more solar power outside the country than the whole thing inside the country. But nobody knows. I mean, I was talking to a minister of energy, and I was telling her in Bulgaria, do you know about this company? No, never heard. I mean, do you know that this Bulgarian company, which has an office next door to your office, has installed in England, Germany, Japan, and US more solar projects than everything that is installed in Bulgaria? I didn't know that. So, I mean, this anecdote shows what is the big break between government and private sector, and in that sense, because of this gap, if we talk about benefits and profits, society is losing somehow from that kind of divorce between government and business.
So first of all, I'm really glad that I picked this question because I don't know about everybody else, but I was in dire need of some optimism, and now the three of you have each given me reasons to be optimistic. I also note that the question around sort of governments, business, and to some respect consumers and citizens, it keeps coming up, and Balázs referred to it several times in the past, so I would say that should be maybe our next point of discussion. But before that, Balázs, please tell us.
Practically, I only can repeat what my colleagues in the panel mentioned, because I think that what we really can like in the capitalism is the competition, as Julian mentioned. So this is a competitive society, and yeah, at the end, of course, from the gains from the greening is for the whole society. But if we concentrate on the profit, I think proper companies can find the profitability in each part of this energy puzzle. It's very important, also in the new energy businesses and also in the old ones, because it's also still important element of the overall infrastructure. So I think that we can find profitability in each segment. The important is to understand our corporate environment and react on the changes. So I don't want to tell company names, but some company really made fantastic shifts also in the old school energy segments, not only in the renewable parts, and manage profitably its businesses, because understood what are the changing factors of this greening idea. And I think that now the biggest challenge from this profitability approach is that as I told formerly, this is that now we are in a real abnormal situation, therefore the normal calculation is very difficult. So understand that what will be the next step. Because I think that Europe made a bid for the natural gas, that natural gas will help in the transition. And there was lots of publication that gas is the transition fuel. Now this is under challenge, and therefore it's need to rethink a lot of former approaches about how to invest your money. But I think that also in the grid management, also in the old energy, also in the new energy, companies can find profitable operations.
It's very interesting that we've actually, in the responses you've given, you've answered more of the questions from the audience, including there was a question whether profit should solely be defined as increased added value. So I think we actually have answered that question and related ones. There are more and more questions coming through, and many of them look exactly into the link between the green transition and social development in the region. So I want to talk a little bit about this with you. I also see a very interesting question which pretty much said, should the funds available now, let's say, be misused or not used towards the transition? Can we expect to see actually challenges brought to these governments by this, including can we envision legal challenges in the future should, let's say, this unique historical opportunity be missed out? The question was a bit shorter than that. I'm giving a bit more context to it. And also, listening to Julian and to everyone earlier as well on this whole question of the LNG plans. Obviously there is more carbon in the ground than we have space in the atmosphere for. So what do we do if actually our planned development still relies on this fuel, which, by the way, I don't think the transitional story ever had very much buy-in. I'll have to be very honest. In Brussels, I think that was a big question mark, whether gas could be seen as a transitional fuel at this stage in the climate emergency. But in any case, so the question is, what do we do now if these questions are popping up more and more? And we are actually seeing citizens responding extremely strongly in solidarity with Ukrainian citizens. Also in the face of the war, we're seeing that the narratives are changing in communities in Europe around reliance on gas, around the sort of sacrifices that some communities have announced, let's say, they'd be willing to go through. And so I'm just wondering where there is a new space being created at the moment, and how can this be better used to actually, and who should be in that space? Should it be the private sector working alongside citizens and communities? Is this what we can expect to be the model of change going forward? And how can we also then still entice governments to participate in that project? Because if governments sort of do their own thing, irrespective of sort of these discussions and the need to think of social development through the lens of the green transition, then I don't really know how we could actually bridge this gap that seems to be growing at the moment. So I realize the question is quite complicated. I've tried to build on what came through from the audience. So I'm very happy to invite you. And maybe, Fadi, you've never been the first person to answer a question. Maybe, if you don't mind, I'd like to invite you to jump in.
Thank you very much. I think it was very wise from the organizer not to put me first, or from you, because I usually very difficult to stop when I start. What is important from my point of view is, like, for us as a business, it's not an issue. Like, the transition is happening, it will happen, and we will make money and profit, and we will deliver great services, whether here, somewhere else, as Bulgarian colleagues. One of the biggest investor in Chile is a Czech company doing solar installation there. So it's for us, it's not this issue. But for me personally, I like this country, I like to live here. And for me, it's really sad and really frustrating when I try to create some kind of like more partner network in order to make more inclusive this kind of transition. And I think it's not soluble. Like, you cannot say it's just clients or communities and private sector, or it's just private and government. Or I think we need some kind of like network and partnership creation, because it's all of us together in this. And we can play a separatist role. The banks will do their own, we do our own, the government do our own, but then it's not us who is losing. I don't know the other two. People thought that banks are forever, but they thought about bookshops the same 10 years ago. So I don't know. I really would like to see more cooperation and more partnership networks and more stakeholders coming together and speaking really genuinely how to make the best for this country, for this region, for Europe, and how to utilize the opportunities that is there. First, they need to understand that it's there. There is still a lot of people who don't understand how big an opportunity it is. And second, we need to change our attitude. It's not one segment. It's not government policy. It's not European Commission allocating funds. It's working together in order to really find and navigate through this storm in the best way.
Thank you. Julian, you smiled at the question because perhaps it is maybe too wide. So now I'd like to ask you to challenge me. And please tell me, how can I reframe this in a way that actually yields to maybe some direct responses from your side?
No, I mean, you can reframe it any way you like, but you asked a very wide question, so I'll just pick two bits of it.
Yes.
And one is about the banks and what they have to do, and because we criticize the governments quite a lot, and everybody loves doing that, I would criticize a little bit the banks and financial institutions, or just advise them to become a little bit more aggressive towards the governments about the big pot of money. And this big pot of money is the recovery funds, all the ETS proceeds. Then over COVID, we made a lot of money over COVID. I mean, over COVID, the savings in the banks expanded massively. Now there is inflation, that this money is disappearing and doing nothing, especially in these environments where, like Czech Republic, like Bulgaria, where you have a lot of banks which are branches of big banks. And basically, the money stays there and finances something somewhere else. And I think the banks should go to the governments and say, well, let us tell you how money works. How money works, because you don't know. Your job is to deal with social issues, with defense, with education, and so on, basically to distribute money, but not to operate money for a profit. And there is a massive opportunity to turn all these piles of money into a driving force, not as a sort of a lazy distribution process. So that's one of the things that I would tell the banks and all the attack the governments and go and tell them, you don't know how to do this, we know, let's work together. You have to be a little bit more aggressive into that. And because you were mentioning the gas and the transitional fuel, all that, because it's my favorite topic. The whole thing about gas as transitional fuel is very misleading. And one of the reasons is that gas is just not a transitional fuel. And when I say that it's not a transitional fuel, based on data, it's not a transitional fuel. If you look at countries with more aggressive, more ambitious, let's say, climate and carbon reduction policies, like UK, for instance, or Germany, or various other countries, or even not ambitious countries, like Australia. I mean, Australia is a country that says, the government says, we don't give a whatever about climate change. They removed carbon trading and so on. And what you see as a trend is that coal is declining, but it is not replaced by gas. So there is this relationship that the gas industry is promoting all the time, that, oh, in order to move from coal to renewables, we have to go through gas. It's just not true. It's not happening. And it's not happening in an environment when the renewables were still expensive. I mean, now renewables, the spot market is 200 euros. I don't know what it is at the moment for megawatt hour. The contracts for renewables could go down to 20. I mean, the difference is not in percentages. It's 5 times, 10 times. And this is an environment where renewables are starting to push very, very, very aggressively. And any suggestion that we have to finance gas because it is transitional fuel, yes, we understand that it's not a good thing, but we have to make this compromise because it's transitional fuel. It's just not. And we have to go on and on and on and on and on, repeating that and changing the taxonomy, because the taxonomy on gas is based on this wrong perception, wrong notion pushed by the gas industry.
And not to mention that the repercussions would obviously be felt by consumers and citizens.
Of course, because these are,
so that's
A,
big
these
problem.
are stranded assets, B, these are public money, see this as a missed opportunity. And then, of course, into this whole transitional fuel is the other concept, hydrogen-ready infrastructure, which is a complete hoax.
Yes, so we are approaching the end of the panel, so I will actually ask Balázs, who has first referred to the social factor, and actually he's referred to it twice in the previous intervention, so I did notice and I made note of it. I do think the discussions we're having were probably a bit different than what you had in mind, but I am afraid that I'll have to ask you to limit your response to maybe maximum 3 minutes.
Okay, but I'm really sorry that I put on the table this gas as a transition fuel. I thought to the German energy the policy when their plan was that close all the coal and nuclear and practically replace it with gas and build a new gas infrastructure from Russia. So I think it's a 1 hour additional panel to speak about that. What is the current situation with the gas? So it's really I agree otherwise with Julian's comment on it. So I think that we criticize the governments, we criticize the banks as well. Let's criticize at the end the society also. So I think that the demand side responses, I think, is also key. So if we are not ready to change our habits, it's also a big challenge. Julian, you mentioned that there are lots of bank debits now as a result of the COVID. It's also the decision of the society. They do not invest into energy efficiency project. Why? In my country, because of the regulated household tariffs, very simply. This is a bad business case. Why to invest in an environment when the government guarantee for me the household prices? I know that this is different, for example, in Czech Republic, so as you mentioned, Fadi, that here it's more ambitious. But I think in a lot of cases, the thinking that how we can incentivize the decisions of the society with education, with telling them the longer term impacts of their decisions, it would be extremely important. So I think we have a lot of things to do on that side as well. And I hope that we will somehow find the channels to educate people, because otherwise I don't believe that it will be a successful transition, mainly in the household sector when we have lots of problems.
Let's make it our aim that next year at the same summit we can already discuss the successful headway we've made in that regard. So Martin, over to you. Do you actually see a little bit, you've referred to it in your responses before, that there's options currently not explored, but exactly the space that's opening up, the relationship between citizens, governments, private sector, can we steer it towards social development in the region, and how?
I think the most crucial will be from this perspective, the push principle of the, let's say, society. And who is the society? I will pick now only two aspects. One is the, let's say, consumer or common people, and then, for example, factories. So I will deposit some money in the bank, and I can put some pressure on the bank. So what do you do with my money? You need to invest it somewhere, right? Is there, and I could create, and of course not only I, but the more people, and to make some pressure on the bank to invest or to provide further loans to projects which relate to renewable energy. I have already seen it happening here in Czech Republic, that they simply have some quotas and they are being pushed by someone that they need to invest or to finance these projects. So this could be one way. And the second is that we all pay make some savings, and those savings are being collected in some pension fund. Of course, that depends on the countries. And you can ask the pension fund managers, what do you do with your money? Where do you invest it? And one of the ways could be that you again create some pressure that okay, I'm saving here money for my 30 years, and I want to leave the money either for me or for my kids, and please, fund manager, try to invest into some more socially, long-term aspect, for example, in this renewable energy. So that could be another way how to pull it's sort of pull and push at the same time, simply to create the pressure on this money which you generate. So these are the two aspects from my side.
Great, thank you. I want to return to the audience. That's been extremely interactive. Just to say, we have more than 15 questions. Some of them have very clear answers, yes/no, but they, I think, will be answered later on in the day, because I've seen many questions around the trade-offs between energy technologies. They're actually on the agenda for later in the day, so please stay tuned for all of that. I do want to acknowledge one person who's asked 2 questions, and this time not in an anonymous format. So it's Isvan Sabo from KPMG Central Eastern Europe, who has asked 2 questions. And now what I will do, because we don't have a huge amount of time, is I will actually give the panelists the option to answer either. So one question is on energy storage. What can we do to promote it in the region? Are there bottlenecks? And the second question is about energy communities. Do they have a significant contribution to make? And I think this has been maybe alluded to. So because we don't have a lot of time, it's really a minute each, and then just maybe then pick between these. And Martin, as you've been a partner of the summit, I'd like to start with you, and please.
I think I can pass it, for example, to Fadi, because he was always the last one who begins the first, so I will make the pass to Fadi, no problem with that.
Actually, it's excellent, because excellent questions, very important ones. First one, of course, there is bottleneck. Bottlenecks is manufacturing right now. We don't have enough components. The supply chain is under stress. Majority of the battery systems are manufactured in China. There is some manufacturing in Korea, but it's different type of technology. And also there is a huge demand from the automotive sector. So we are competing with automotive. I mean, in stationary storage. So this is the biggest bottleneck. I'm not speaking about the regulatory stuff, because really this is the biggest one. And energy communities, yeah, it's really interesting concept, but right now I feel it's a little bit a buzzword. It's not really clear what it's meant by energy community. There is some efforts to clarify it, but I think it's a little bit of artificial concept, and it needs a certain cultural roots and backgrounds, and it will not be successful in every country. From my point of view, it's really important to give any legal entity the right to participate in all aspects of the market, and to do the unbundling role only over 100,000 participants, for example.
Perfect.
This will create a community.
Thank you very much. Julian.
Energy storage, very briefly. One thing is we should replace the gas discussion with the US with the battery discussion. So we need freedom batteries, not freedom gas for that. The second thing to consider is that one of the best storage mechanisms is energy efficiency. And energy efficiency of buildings, and it comes completely for free because you do it for something else. So do consider energy efficiency of buildings as a battery.
Great.
As an energy storage.
Thank you. Balázs.
I think storage is an important part of the puzzle, but now on short-term storing of the energy mainly. So for peak shaving from noon to night, but it will not solve the summer-winter issues. So I think we need additional solutions also for them. I agree that energy efficiency also can help, but we need others as well. Maybe hydrogen can be on longer term, but it's really on longer term. And the energy communities, I think it's a promising idea. The question is the same. Of course, I react from my Hungarian perspective that in my country, practically I don't really understand the business model behind because of the regulated prices for the households. So it's not easy to offer an energy community solution in a framework when practically there are regulated prices on the market. From industrial usage, it can be an opportunity.
Great. And so much space to expand. Martin?
Only one, the first part, we are a great supporter of this storage. I think it's a must. We will not discuss why. And I think the right incentive is, again, for example, as in Balázs' home country, give me the framework. As, for example, in this tender, we are now applying for a 50 megawatts project of battery storage. Right, give me the framework. I will do my job in the competition field. No problem. I'm happy with that. Give me the chance. I'm eager to do so.
Perfect. We're all happy with that. Give us all the chance to advance the energy transition. So thank you to the International Sustainable Finance Center here in Prague for giving us the chance to have this discussion today. And thanks to everyone, the audience in the room and those taking part online. And I hope to continue discussing this in the future. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.